não nos amar.
Кто-то спасти из этого ада.
嚯！ 好漂亮的玉石，很漂亮哦。
What if the Jordan River is beginning to reveal a different story rather than renewal? As water levels dropped, a sealed chamber with forgotten architectural design emerged from beneath the Jordan River. Inside lay a powerful object buried beside the skeleton of a winged creature with a serpent-like skull. Then the water itself began to darken, spreading black streaks across sections of the Jordan. Soon after, even more new discoveries hidden beneath centuries of mud started drawing the attention from around the world. What is really buried beneath the Jordan River? Why is it uncovering what has been concealed for generations? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this exploration, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next discovery. For thousands of years, the Jordan River has symbolized hope, renewal, and new beginnings. It was the river the Israelites crossed before entering the Promised Land, and later became one of the most sacred locations in biblical history. Yet recently, the river has begun telling a different story. Water levels dropped in several areas. Cracks appeared along the banks. Sections of shoreline collapsed into the current. Pilgrims reported unusual discoloration in the water, while local guides admitted that conditions felt different from anything they had seen before. Then, near Bethany beyond the Jordan, a portion of the riverbank suddenly gave way. What initially appeared to be a natural collapse quickly became something far more significant. Buried beneath the mud was a stone chamber. It was small, barely large enough for a few people to stand inside, and appeared to have been deliberately sealed in antiquity. Archaeologists arriving at the site expected pottery, tools, or perhaps human remains. Instead, they found something entirely unexpected. At the center of the chamber lay a long wooden staff. Despite its age, much of the object remained intact. Mineral deposits had hardened around portions of the wood, preserving its shape. The staff measured nearly 2 meters in length and appeared to have been placed carefully upon a raised stone platform. But it was not alone. Just beside it rested a skeleton unlike anything found elsewhere along the Jordan. The creature's body stretched more than 3 meters from head to tail. Large skeletal extensions projected from both sides of the rib cage, resembling the attachment points of wings. Several fragments remained connected, suggesting the creature had once possessed an enormous wingspan. Yet the skull was the most disturbing feature. It was elongated, narrow, almost serpentine. The jaw structure resembled that of a giant snake far more than that of a bird or any known winged animal. Rows of teeth lined the mouth, while the eye sockets faced slightly forward, giving the skull an unnervingly predatory appearance. News of the discovery spread rapidly. Within days, attention shifted from the skeleton to the staff itself. Many observers immediately drew comparisons to the staff of Moses. According to biblical tradition, the prophet's staff became one of the most recognizable symbols of divine authority. The fact that a staff had now emerged from the Jordan River, the very river connected to Israel's journey into the Promised Land, was enough to ignite worldwide speculation. Archaeologists urged caution. No inscription identified the object. No evidence directly linked it to Moses. Yet one detail continued fueling debate. Carved into the upper section of the staff was the image of a serpent winding upward along the wood, a symbol impossible to ignore. No one knew what message followed. No one knew why the staff and the strange creature had been buried together. But as the Jordan continued to uncover what had long been hidden beneath its waters, many began asking the same question. Why would a river associated with redemption reveal thing linked to one of the greatest deliverance stories in history? As news of mysterious things buried beneath the Jordan River's surface spread, something happened that shifted attention away from the excavation entirely. Early in the morning near Qasr al-Yahud, pilgrims arriving for baptisms noticed something unusual along the riverbank. The Jordan appeared darker than normal. At first, many assumed it was mud stirred up by recent movement in the current. But as the hours passed, the discoloration spread. Long black streaks began drifting through the river. Some sections appeared almost oil-like, creating dark ribbons that stretched across the surface. The strange color remained visible for hours before slowly dispersing downstream. Videos recorded by visitors quickly circulated online. Within days, similar reports emerged from other sections of the Jordan. Witnesses described water that seemed unusually dark and opaque. Some claimed the river looked almost lifeless under the afternoon sun. Others reported a strong odor lingering above the surface, though environmental teams were unable to identify a single source responsible for all the reports. Scientists proposed several possibilities: changes in sediment, algae activity, seasonal environmental fluctuations. Each explanation addressed part of the phenomenon, yet none fully explained why reports were appearing simultaneously from multiple locations along the river. For many observers, however, the most unsettling aspect was not the color itself. It was where it happened. For centuries, people had entered these waters believing they symbolized cleansing and renewal. The Jordan represented the washing away of the old and the beginning of something new. Now the same river appeared clouded and darkened. One elderly guide who had worked near the baptism sites for more than 30 years described the scene in simple terms. The river looked tired. His words spread quickly among local residents, because they captured a feeling many were already struggling to describe. Nothing catastrophic had happened. The Jordan was still flowing. Pilgrims were still arriving. The prayers continued. Yet the first event in this strange sequence left behind an uncomfortable question. What if the river known for cleansing was no longer hiding what lay beneath? What if it was beginning to reveal it? Just days after reports of the discoloration began circulating, another strange phenomenon appeared along several sections of the river. This time, it was impossible to miss. Dead fish started washing ashore. At first, there were only a few, a handful caught among reeds, several floating near the banks. Nothing large enough to trigger alarm. But over the following week, the numbers increased dramatically. Hundreds of fish appeared along different stretches of the Jordan. Some were small river species commonly found in the area. Others were unusually large. What puzzled observers was the pattern. The fish were not concentrated in one location as would normally be expected from pollution or a localized environmental event. Instead, they appeared in scattered pockets along the river. One morning, pilgrims arriving near a baptism site found dozens of fish lying motionless in the mud. By afternoon, birds had already begun gathering overhead. The smell of decay drifted across the shoreline. Environmental teams collected samples. Water quality tests were conducted. Experts suggested a combination of temperature changes, reduced oxygen levels, and environmental stress. Yet even after investigations began, no single explanation fully accounted for the scale or distribution of the event. For local residents, however, the scientific debate was not what captured their attention. It was the symbolism. For generations, the Jordan had been known as a river that sustained life. Farms depended on it. Wildlife thrived around it. Pilgrims came seeking renewal in its waters. Now those same waters were returning death to the shore. An elderly fisherman who had worked the river for decades stood silently beside one of the affected areas before finally saying, "Something is wrong. The river is giving back what it used to keep alive." The statement spread quickly through nearby communities. As images of the fish circulated online, visitors began arriving not only to pray, but also to witness the phenomenon for themselves. The Jordan continued to flow as it always had. Yet along its banks, the evidence remained. Dark water had been the first warning. Now death was appearing in its wake. And as workers cleared the shoreline and removed the carcasses, no one realized that the receding water was preparing to reveal something far more disturbing beneath the mud. Near a stretch of exposed riverbed south of the Jordan River, workers noticed a series of unusual depressions preserved in hardened mud. At first glance, they appeared to be ordinary footprints left by animals crossing the shoreline. But the measurements told a different story. Each impression exceeded 50 centimeters in length. The spacing between them was even more puzzling. Some prints were separated by nearly 2 meters, suggesting a stride far larger than that of any human. Yet the shape itself looked unmistakably humanoid. 5 toes, a defined heel, an arched center. Archaeologists rushed to document the site before erosion could destroy it. The deeper they examined the area, the stranger it became. The tracks did not wander randomly across the riverbed. Instead, they followed a remarkably straight path toward the location where the mysterious chamber containing the staff had been discovered weeks earlier. Drone surveys revealed something even more unusual. The footprints appeared to begin abruptly from a section of exposed stone and ended just as suddenly near the water's edge. There was no obvious starting point, no visible destination, only a line of massive impressions crossing the mud. Scientists proposed several explanations: natural erosion, geological formations, misidentified ancient markings. Yet none of the theories gained widespread acceptance. Many observers were reminded of another passage connected to the Jordan River. In the biblical account, the Jordan once parted, allowing people to cross on dry ground. Now, centuries later, the drying riverbed seemed to be revealing traces of another crossing entirely. Not a crowd, not a nation, but something, or someone, moving alone. The photographs spread rapidly across social media. Some dismissed them as natural formations. Others believed they were evidence of a forgotten chapter buried beneath the river's history. Then one researcher reviewing aerial images noticed a detail that had previously gone unnoticed. The footprints were not the only marks preserved in the mud. Running parallel to several of the impressions was a narrow groove, as though something long and straight had been dragged across the ground beside them. A staff, or perhaps something very much like one. And suddenly, the mysterious object discovered beneath the Jordan no longer seemed like an isolated find. As researchers studied the massive footprints and the mysterious groove running beside them, another discovery emerged only a few hundred meters away. This one was impossible to overlook. Aerial surveys conducted during the continued drop in water levels revealed a strange pattern beneath the Jordan River itself. At first, it appeared to be nothing more than a line of exposed stones. But when archaeologists examined the site more closely, they realized the formation stretched much farther than anyone expected. The stones were not scattered randomly. They formed a continuous pathway, running from one side of the river toward the other. Divers and survey teams were brought in to investigate the submerged sections. What they found raised even more questions. Many of the stones appeared intentionally placed. Several were unusually large and flat, positioned side by side in a manner that resembled an ancient roadway rather than a natural formation. In some locations, the alignment remained remarkably straight despite centuries of water flow. The discovery immediately attracted attention because of its location. The structure sat beneath one of the most historically significant stretches of the Jordan River, a place long associated with one of the most famous crossings in biblical history. According to the book of Joshua, the waters of the Jordan stopped flowing, allowing the Israelites to cross on dry ground as they entered the Promised Land. Many researchers warned against drawing direct conclusions. Ancient riverbeds often contain unusual geological formations. Natural processes can sometimes create surprisingly organized patterns. Yet even the most cautious observers admitted the site was extraordinary. Then came another detail. Embedded between several of the stones were fragments of pottery, bronze pieces, and traces of charcoal. Preliminary analysis suggested that at least some of the materials could date back thousands of years. The pathway was no longer simply a geological curiosity. It had become an archaeological site. As excavations expanded, workers uncovered something else. Several stones contained carved markings. Most were heavily eroded, but one symbol appeared repeatedly. A staff, not a detailed image. Only a simple vertical line with a curved top. Yet the resemblance was enough to reignite speculation surrounding the mysterious object discovered earlier. Now 3 separate discoveries seemed connected: the staff, the giant footprints, and the hidden pathway beneath the Jordan. None proved the others. None provided definitive answers. But together they formed a pattern that was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. For centuries, people had looked at the Jordan as a symbol of crossing from one life into another. Now the river itself seemed to be uncovering evidence of an ancient crossing buried beneath its waters. And as archaeologists continued mapping the submerged pathway, sonar equipment detected something unexpected at its farthest visible end. The stone route did not simply disappear into the riverbed. It appeared to lead directly toward a large buried structure still hidden beneath layers of mud and sediment. Something was waiting at the end of the path, and no one yet knew what it was. As excavation teams followed the ancient stone pathway beneath the Jordan, attention shifted toward the anomaly detected at its farthest visible point. For weeks, sonar scans had shown the same thing: a large geometric structure buried beneath layers of mud and sediment. The shape was too regular to be natural, and it sat precisely at the end of the submerged pathway. Excavation began immediately. Pumps were brought in to divert water from the area while archaeologists carefully removed centuries of accumulated sediment. The deeper they dug, the clearer the structure became. It was not a building, nor was it a tomb in the traditional sense. It appeared to be a chamber, a massive stone chamber. The roof had partially collapsed long ago, but much of the interior remained sealed beneath layers of debris. When researchers finally entered, they discovered something unexpected. The room was empty. At least, it appeared empty at first. There were no treasures, no skeletons, no ceremonial objects, only bare stone walls surrounding a circular platform at the center of the chamber. Yet it was the walls that captured everyone's attention. Carved into them were hundreds of inscriptions. Some resembled ancient Hebrew. Others appeared far older. Several symbols matched markings previously found near the staff and along the submerged pathway. One symbol appeared more frequently than all the others: a staff, repeated again and again throughout the chamber. As documentation continued, another discovery emerged. At the center platform stood a large stone pedestal. Something had once rested upon it. The indentation was unmistakable: a long object, roughly the size and shape of the staff discovered weeks earlier. The realization spread quickly through the site. The staff found in the sealed chamber may not have originally belonged there at all. It may have been removed from this location. The possibility transformed the entire investigation. Suddenly, the discoveries were no longer isolated events. The pathway, the footprints, the staff, the winged skeleton, and now this chamber. Each seemed connected to the next. Then workers cleaning debris from the eastern wall uncovered the most intriguing detail yet: a portion of text preserved beneath a collapsed section of stone. Most of the inscription had been destroyed. Only a single sentence remained legible. The crossing was not the end. The phrase immediately became the focus of debate. Crossing what? The Jordan? A boundary? Or something else entirely? No one could answer. Yet many found the wording strangely unsettling. For generations, the Jordan River had represented arrival, a journey completed, a promise fulfilled. But the inscription suggested the opposite, that the crossing itself was only the beginning. And as researchers continued examining the chamber, they discovered a narrow passageway hidden behind the western wall, a passage that led deeper underground, far beyond the limits of the excavation site, far beyond anything they had expected to find beneath the Jordan River. As researchers examined the hidden passage beyond the chamber, expectations were surprisingly modest. Most assumed it would lead to another storage room, perhaps a collapsed tunnel, perhaps nothing at all. Instead, it became the most unsettling discovery of the entire expedition. The passage descended gradually beneath the Jordan River. Its walls were carved directly into the bedrock, showing signs of deliberate construction rather than natural erosion. Tool marks remained visible in several places despite centuries underground. The deeper the team traveled, the colder the air became. Within a few hundred meters, temperatures had dropped noticeably. Then the tunnel widened. What lay ahead looked less like a corridor and more like an underground avenue. The floor had been leveled, the walls straightened, and running down the center was a shallow groove remarkably similar to the one previously discovered beside the giant footprints exposed on the riverbank. For the first time, archaeologists began considering a possibility many had avoided discussing publicly. What if all of the discoveries belonged to a single complex? The staff, the pathway, the chamber, the footprints, and now this underground route. The answer seemed increasingly obvious. Someone had built this place. The tunnel continued for nearly another kilometer before opening into a vast subterranean hall. The chamber was unlike anything found elsewhere along the Jordan. Massive stone pillars supported the ceiling. Ancient carvings covered the walls. Yet one detail immediately dominated the room. Four enormous alcoves had been carved into the stone. Each appeared designed to hold a statue. Three stood empty. The fourth did not. Inside rested a damaged figure nearly 4 meters tall. Time had destroyed much of it. The lower portion remained intact, showing a humanoid body draped in carved robes. Fragments of wings extended behind the shoulders. But the head had broken away long ago. The missing pieces were eventually discovered scattered across the floor. When reconstructed digitally, they revealed something unexpected. The face was not human. It possessed elongated features resembling those of a serpent. The resemblance to the winged skeleton discovered beside the staff was impossible to ignore. Then came another surprise. Carved beneath the statue was a line of text. Unlike many inscriptions found elsewhere in the complex, this one remained almost completely intact. After several days of analysis, researchers produced a tentative translation. The Guardians crossed with the people. The phrase immediately triggered controversy. Who were the Guardians? Why were they associated with the crossing? And why did the statue combine both wings and serpent-like features? No one could answer. But the discovery altered the direction of the investigation. Until now, archaeologists believed they were uncovering separate mysteries connected by geography. Now it appeared they were uncovering fragments of a forgotten narrative. A narrative hidden beneath one of the most famous rivers in biblical history. And while researchers debated the meaning of the inscription, survey teams exploring the far side of the hall reported something even more extraordinary. Behind the 4 alcoves stood a sealed stone door. Unlike everything else in the complex, this door showed no sign of damage. It appeared untouched, as though it had been waiting to be opened. As attention focused on the massive stone door hidden behind the 4 alcoves, archaeologists faced a difficult decision. For weeks, no one attempted to open it. The structure appeared remarkably well preserved despite being buried beneath the Jordan for centuries. Unlike the surrounding chambers, the door showed almost no signs of erosion. Its edges remained tightly sealed, as though the passage beyond had been intentionally isolated from the rest of the complex. Eventually, a small team was authorized to proceed. The process took nearly 2 days. Ancient stone locking mechanisms had fused together over time, forcing researchers to remove sections piece by piece. When the door finally shifted, a rush of cold air escaped from the darkness beyond. Then came silence. No one spoke for several seconds, because the chamber behind the door was unlike anything they expected to find. It was not a tomb. It was not a treasure room. It was a library. Stone shelves lined every wall from floor to ceiling. Most had collapsed long ago, but hundreds of objects remained scattered across the floor. Clay tablets, stone fragments, pieces of carved wood, and dozens of cylindrical containers sealed with hardened resin. For the next several days, the excavation became a race against time. Many of the artifacts began deteriorating the moment they were exposed to fresh air. Researchers worked around the clock to preserve as much as possible. Among the recovered items, one group immediately stood out. A collection of tablets covered in inscriptions unlike anything found elsewhere in the complex. The writing appeared to combine multiple ancient systems. Some symbols resembled early Semitic scripts. Others matched nothing currently known. Translation proved difficult. Yet several repeated phrases eventually emerged. One appeared more often than any other. The crossing, not the river, not the people, simply the crossing. As if the event itself was more important than those who experienced it. Then another phrase surfaced. This one generated far greater controversy. The staff opened the way. Researchers immediately debated its meaning. Some believed it referred symbolically to leadership or authority. Others pointed out the obvious connection to the mysterious staff discovered earlier. But the most disturbing discovery was still waiting. Inside one of the sealed containers rested a thin stone tablet no larger than a book. Unlike the others, it contained both text and imagery. The upper section showed a line of people moving between walls of water. The lower section showed 4 winged figures standing on the opposite side, not welcoming the travelers, watching them. The image sent shockwaves through the excavation team. because it echoed the inscription found beneath the underground statue. The guardians crossed with the people. For the first time, multiple discoveries appeared to be telling the same story. A crossing, a staff, guardians, and a hidden complex buried beneath the Jordan River. No one knew whether the story was historical, symbolic, or entirely mythical. But one thing had become increasingly clear. The river was no longer revealing isolated artifacts. It was revealing fragments of a narrative. And somewhere within the hundreds of untranslated tablets still waiting to be studied, researchers believed the final piece of that narrative might still be hidden. As researchers continued cataloging hundreds of artifacts recovered from the underground library, attention remained focused on the tablets describing the crossing, the staff, and the mysterious guardians. Then a discovery emerged that changed the conversation entirely. Unlike the other artifacts, this tablet had not been found on a shelf. It had been hidden, deep within a narrow cavity behind the central wall of the chamber. The stone slab was unusually thin and covered on both sides with inscriptions. But what immediately caught the attention of researchers was a symbol carved at the top. A river, a staff, and a serpent, all enclosed within a circle. The imagery appeared nowhere else in the complex. Translation efforts began immediately. The upper half of the text was badly damaged, but several lines survived. The first described a crossing. The second mentioned a covenant. The third mentioned a warning. Then came the final section. Unlike the rest of the inscriptions, the writing suddenly shifted into what appeared to be a direct statement. A message, not a record, not a prayer. A message. Only fragments could be translated with confidence. What was carried across was not left behind. What watched still watches. The remaining text had been lost. Yet those few lines were enough to spark intense debate. What exactly had been carried across? The ark? The staff? A tradition? A belief? Or something else entirely? The mystery deepened when imaging specialists examined the reverse side of the tablet. There they discovered a map, or at least something resembling one. A winding line representing the Jordan River stretched across the stone. Several locations were marked along its course. One matched the site where the staff had been discovered. Another corresponded to the underground chamber beneath the river. But a third marker pointed somewhere no excavation had yet taken place. A location several kilometers away, far from the current dig, far from the attention of archaeologists. Researchers initially assumed the mark represented another settlement or ritual site. Then they noticed a small inscription beside it. Unlike the other text, this phrase remained perfectly preserved. Just 3 words. The first crossing. No one knew what it meant, because according to history, there was only one crossing that mattered. Yet the tablet seemed to suggest otherwise, as if the famous crossing remembered by generations was not the beginning of the story, but the continuation of something much older. And somewhere beyond the excavation site, somewhere along the Jordan's ancient course, the map appeared to be pointing toward a place that had not yet been found. A place the builders of the underground complex considered important enough to hide from the world for thousands of years. One of the best aspects of spending time alone with God is being renewed daily by His Word and presence. Lamentations 3 verses 22 to 23 says, "The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness." When we make space for God in our lives, especially at the beginning of the day, He is faithful to renew and prepare us for all we will face out in the world. So as we enter into this week focusing on renewal, where do you need renewal? How greatly do you need God's mercies in your life? May God teach and guide us into daily renewal as we make space every morning for Him to fill. God has an incredible plan for renewal in your life. He knows better than anyone the trials, circumstances, and people that wear you down. And He knows that you need time to be refreshed by Him. Often, we seek rest and renewal from people and entertainment. Our friends, family, and entertainment can be great sources of fun and rest to be sure, but the only consistent and true source of renewal we have is spending time with our Heavenly Father. Only He knows to the full extent what you need, and only He can give it to you. So, before we dive into the process of having specific areas of our lives renewed by God this week, let's allow Him to simply reveal how to rest in His Word and presence. First, let's look at what Scripture says about our need for renewal. 2 Corinthians 4 verse 16 says, Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. Because of the nature of sin and separation from God, we as humans will not live in our fleshly bodies forever. Genesis 3 verse 19 says, "By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken. For you are dust, and to dust you shall return." But we also have the promise of Jesus in John 11 verse 26 that everyone who lives and believes in him shall never die. We live on the earth knowing one day our earthly bodies will pass away, and we will at the same time be taken from this world to the next. But God's desire is that while you are here in this body, you would be renewed in your spirit every day. Though your body will grow weary, He desires to strengthen your spirit with the hope of an everlasting life with an all-loving God who cares for you. You can meet with God every day. You've been given the ability through the Spirit to rest in God's presence, to know His nearness and love. You can have the same experience as Paul in being renewed day by day. 2 Corinthians 4 verse 16. So, how can we experience God's promised renewal? How do we rest in God's presence and allow Him to revive us? First, it starts with trusting that God will reveal His love to you when you meet with Him.